Where's that darn karate Jew? They're making us Robinists look horrible. Shalom and God bless. Welcome to another exciting edition of Torah Watchman Show, LLC. You're not other than your humble karate host here, Reb Yaar ben-Emmett. Emmet means truth. And I'll do everything humanly possible to give you nothing but the truth and everything I report here on my channel on YouTube. Please subscribe, share all the information that you hear and learn you find useful. There's so many people out there in the world that need to understand what it means to be Jewish, for instance. They need to understand what qualifies Jewish history. What is Jewish history? And is it significant in the modern era to teach Jewish history? In some public schools, they don't even teach Holocaust history anymore. But the topic of this Torah Watchman Show edition is, what is Palestine? What is Palestine? Again, there's so much ignorance around that subject. Even the news outlets like Fox News, especially the more liberal ones, the Crescent News Network, MSNBC, ABC News, CBS News, PBS, NPR, all of these, whether they intend to sound anti-Semitic, the end and the messaging is anti-Semitic. As a lead up to my video presentation, I'm not the only one that said this. The levels of anti-Semitism have increased to critical mass, folks. We are a lot like the 1930s in Nazi Germany, where you see caricatures of big-nosed Jews and Jews looking like the devil, Beelzebub, and everything else, and cartoons and satires and even poetry and written about the Jewish people, everything else. You see and hear this happening today. Now, I've lost family in the Holocaust. I have family members that were murdered in Belarus, or Belarusia, as it once was known. And it's very personal to me. Even though I have not met these people, what I've done in my home for the Holocaust, for instance, I've refactored, redesigned these old, torn, scratched black and white photographs and colorized them and made them beautiful like they were taken back yesterday. And I believe that the dead are always with us. I really do. I'm not talking about ghosts and spirits, and hauntings. I'm saying that our blessed memory of those people, especially our spoken and personal family, when we tell their tales, when we talk about their stories, when we revisit their lives, especially when we hang their pictures and they're colored in the way they were of the time that they were taken. Some of the photographs I have of my family members that were murdered in the Holocaust in Belarus were probably the last family photographs that were ever taken while some of these people were still alive. Why am I talking about the Holocaust? Well, the greatest loss of life in a 2-day period, for instance, and we're still finding bodies in Israel. The Hamas, unprovoked, premeditated, first strike, surprise attack, I don't know how that's possible, against the nation of Israel, resulted in at least 1,400 people. I heard that death count today. 31 of those people were American citizens, probably most of them dual American-Israeli citizens. They're still American citizens, like my brother Ari Full, that was stabbed in the back by an irate Palestinian teenager that heard a hateful speech by Mahmoud Abbas, the Fatah president, self-elected, self-appointed Fatah member, out of Rafah, heard that speech, and he said, I have to kill a Jew today. And it was my beloved friend Ariful. And this was several years ago. And if I can remember exactly, I would say it was 4 leading up to 5 years ago when this happened. And I cried my eyes out for a week for Ariful. But the murderous attack by radicalized Islamists in Israel, in Eretz Israel, have been gradually increasing up to the point of the actual war event between Hamas and Israel. Israel, for the first time, I think in 50 years, I heard, if that's right, actually declared war. They actually declared war against the duly elected Hamas government by 2 million Palestinian citizens living in the Gaza Strip. But how do we get to the point today where we're at, where we even having honest intellectual logical discussions on Israeli Jews versus Palestinian Arabs? How are we talking about this? How are we talking it in a rational world in which you have history, you have archaeological digs, you have evidence, you have hundreds of evidence? I can't tell you how many discoveries we've made at least monthly in Israel. Jerusalem is built on top of an older Hittite city named Salem. When King David conquered that Hittite city, which was Hittites were a tribe of Canaanites during that time. And we're finding the evidence of that King David really lived with his palace and a coinage of that time and Hebrew language on pottery. And yes, scientists who are not Jews and seculars and atheists saying, well, the Jews had coherent Hebrew language and writing skills and could read and write. Amazing, right? Amazing. 3,000 years ago, 3,200 years ago, the time of King David. But where I'm going is, the Palestinian crisis has reached critical mass. To the point, leading up to the war, Hamas was so bold that they were saying, all of Jerusalem belongs to us. They said, not only is Temple Mount now called Al-Aqsa Mount, the entire city is referred to Al-Aqsa. And I already did a video on this, and quickly, the mosque that is positioned to the, far east of Temple Mount is named Al-Aqsa Mosque. But it's not Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's an older mosque that was built long after the Holy Prophet Muhammad died. Okay? And it's there, guess where? It's there right over the heart and soul of the Holy of Holies of King Solomon Temple. I don't care about King Herod's temple. I really don't. Maybe it was built where the Dome of the Rock is. I don't care. All I care is about the holy. But what I'm about to describe to you and tell you, take you back into history to about 132 Common Era, CE, or AD if you like that calendar system better. I'm going to explain to you where the word Palestine and Palestinians originated. Something that's not taught in any U.S. schools in history, ancient history. You might hear about it if you're a biblical scholar or you're majoring in Jewish history. You may hear about some of it in a yeshiva, I'm not sure. But like on Fox News, they continually refer to Hamas and the poor victims of the war, the Palestinians in Gaza, as Palestinians, like they are legitimate people that have history that is codified as a nation of people. like the Cherokee Nation, right? Native Americans. It once extended from South Carolina, North Carolina, through where Washington, D.C. is. When President George Washington, wanted to build the White House and everything and set up all of that after our independence movement, he literally had to drain the swamp. It needs to be drained again. But that whole area was a sovereign nation of the Cherokee Native Indians. Reason why I say that, because we have history and evidence and fossil remains, arrowheads and everything else that predates the introduction of English colonists coming to this country, Spaniards, French, etc., invading in this country, invading the territory, occupying the territory, taking territory away from one group of people, either through successful execution of a war campaign, whatever. That's how we have 50 states in our sovereign country, United States of America. We can prove that these Native Americans existed. In fact, I am part Cherokee Nation. Yes, my 6th great-grandfather on my father's side was a Cherokee Chief Nation Indian by the name of Chief Broughton. I discovered that through Ancestry.com, and I heard stories in my own family, unlike Elizabeth Warren, okay? Yes, I really have Native American blood in me. In fact, I've done many DNA tests to prove that to myself, sanity check, because you hear stories, right? People tell you stories, but a lot of these stories are just not true. Things that you want to be, but they're not actually true. But I did prove that to myself. I don't want to get long-winded with this, but they found fossil remains of the Cherokee Nation in their migratory path coming up from Colombia and South America, going up to Mexico and Puerto Rico. In these areas, you can see that migration path coming right up. And also the migration path of the original Native American Indians that entered from the Bering Strait from Siberia all the way over to North America. Now, my point I'm trying to make is, before you declare that you are a sovereign people that have every right to be recognized as an independent nation of people, a country, a nation, and things of this nature, to be legitimate, you need to have history behind your back. Of course, many countries have been invaded. You hear, about the history of the Soviet Union, how the Soviet bloc countries like the Czech Republic now, other nations along that border that were invaded, Poland and other countries were invaded by the Soviet Union and controlled Ukraine and other nations for quite some time. They did this through military occupational efforts and successful execution of a war then, combat effort. But it did not change the ethnicity and creeds of those people. I mean, we don't have kings and queens anymore, unless you consider what's going on in England as a king. We don't have these monarchies anymore, or these small little tribal monarchies all over the world where we used to have them. We don't have that anymore. But Polish people are Polish people. Spanish people are Spanish people. German people are German people. Scottish are Scottish people. And they are diversified by their language, for one thing. Most people in Scotland do not speak the language of Paris, per se. And vice versa. People in the Russian Federation speak all different kinds of language. And Kazakhstan and other federated republics and Soviet and the Russian Federation of the day. Sorry, I almost said Soviet Union. These people are as diversified as the melting pot is describing what it means to be American. Where I'm going is that many of these previous tribal creeds and ethnic peoples who once had sovereignty over real estate and land, they had castles and things of this nature, they had soldiers, they had military. Well, they lost their land. The monarchies came and have gone. People don't support that anymore for whatever reason. But we could still go back in history and date where these nations originated. We can. We have history. And that makes them legitimate. When they have an argument, like their Medians, for instance, they have an argument that they are an ethnic creed of people that predate the Ottoman Turks. And also the people in northern Iraq, Kurdistan, they can predate their nation of sovereignty people before Iraq became a country. Long time ago, thank Great Britain for carving out all these oil lanes and the sand and everything else, and forming all these little nations, the little emirates and everything else. But what I'm saying is, the topic of this video is what is Palestine and what are the Palestinian people? And I will do my best to be as unbiased and as truthful and as honest as I can about this subject. All I'm after here in my research, and I've done a lot of research about this topic, and I've done a few videos and this and podcasts too. All I'm after is the truth. That's all I care about. That's all Elohim cares about. If we don't stand for truth, then we stand for a lie, or 50 Shades of Grey. Now, there's an interesting story, and some of you that are not Jewish out there in my target audience, canvases B'nai Noach, Christians, and some Jews, and some people that are indifferent. They're not religious at all. I don't care. I appreciate and I'm honored that you come to my video, and I want you to share with me your interest in what you would like and dislike about this video content. That's why I ask you to subscribe to my channel. Last time, commercial. Subscribe to my channel and sign up for personal notified so you'll be the first one to know when I go online. Excuse me, I do have a little cough. An individual by the name of Bar Kokhba, you may have heard them, in Aramaic is known as the son of the star. He's one of our many false messiahs, Jewish messiahs, that plagued the whole, the Holy Land of Judea. And this goes back to 132 CE and was a great Jewish revolt during that time. Remember, in 70 CE, King Herod the Great's temple was utterly destroyed. And what the Roman Empire was doing, they were gradually encroaching more and more upon the Jewish culture, Jewish language, our rich Jewish traditions like circumcision, like reading the Torah and other things of that nature, or high holidays. A lot of these things were being limited, if not outright prohibited at all, because the Jews were in an occupied territory of Judea during that time. And there was no northern Israel to speak of. It was all Roman occupation. Of course, you remember the division between northern Israel and southern Israel ended up with 9.5 tribes being ultimately lost to the nations of the world, the Gentile nations of the world, fragmented. That's where all the Noahides, I believe, their motivation and interest to worship the one true God and the true monotheistic faith, and all the Baal Teshuvah Jews too, that are coming home to the tribe. And God bless them all for this. We're living in the days of final prophecy leading up to Mashiach. I hope so. But a false Messiah dominated the scene around 132 CE. This individual, his full name was Shimon Bar Kokhba. Kokhba also spelled in many different ways and words. I don't get into that. He died in 135 CE in a place called Bethar, Palestine. It's now the West Bank or Samaria. As Jewish leader who led a very bitter but unsuccessful revolt from the years 132 to 135 CE. When he got killed in the fight, everything went downhill against the Roman dominion in Judea. What happened, if you're interested, why this revolt became so severe and grew in interest? The Eastern Empire, Roman Empire 131, the Roman Emperor Hadrian, decided upon a policy of Hellenization to integrate the Jews into the empire. Sounds like Judah Maccabee and the general Ephraim IV, I believe, who mandated Hellenization over all of Judea, and that led to the Judean Judah Maccabean revolt. Similar here, that the culture of Greece was still heavy embedded in the Roman Empire, and they wanted to de-Judify the entire area of southern Israel, Judea, by introducing Hellenism. In other words, the belief in multiple gods of polytheism. So circumcision was forbidden. A Roman colony known as Aliyah was founded in Jerusalem, and a temple to Jupiter, Zeus, the old Greek god of gods, the great god there. They built a temple, per se, and a monument and a statue and idol right on the ruins of the Jewish Temple Mount. This enraged many Jews, obviously, okay? And that became a great rebellion beginning in 132. The dominant and irascible figure of that time, very charismatic, very brave, warrior kind of person. Actually, he was a descendant of King David, supposedly, a Benjamite. He headed this rebellion. Reputedly, he was of the Davidic descent. At least that's what people believe. What's very interesting, the greatest of rabbis during that time is none other than Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef, gave him his seal of approval as the Mashiach, as a true Mashiach. In fact, during a brief time of independence of this false Messiah, and he conquered a lot of Roman-controlled areas and liberated briefly some Jewish cities. He was not interested by cleansing the temple, by the way. I don't think he was overly religious either. But he even had created corn, just like Judah Maccabee briefly created coinage too, with his emblem on that. But this individual, Bar Kokhba, was like a gangster boss. In other words, if you did not go with him as he said, or if you broke trust with him, he'd cut off your finger. That's the kind of person he was. And long story short, the war became so severe that Emperor Hadrian had to call in help because the Romans were losing the battle against these Jewish rebels, these Zionists per se, I guess. And he notified the governor of Great Britain at that time, or Britain, or Anglo-Saxon England during that time, and it was taken over by the Roman Empire too. By the individual, his name was Gaius Julius Severus, a great Roman Empire general from the area of England of the day. Came down with 35,000 troops, going across the many Roman highways and byways that they actually built across Europe to go to Judea. And long story short, by 135, the overwhelming military might of the Roman Empire defeated the poorly armed and limited number of rebellious Jews led by Bar Kokhba. Not only did Rabbi Akiva lose his life, but the numbers here are staggering. 580,000 Jews were massacred, killed, murdered, and this was the greatest of all Jewish expulsion since the Babylonian time. And you ask yourself, if there was no Bar Kokhba rebellion, how many Jews would be in Judea today if we just waited on the Lord our God, right? But what I'm saying is, yes, Rabbi Akiva, the most well-known and famous rabbi in the Chabad world, for instance, first century rabbi, he was directly responsible for the rallying effort behind Bar Kokhba that ultimately led to the death of 550,000 Jews. So what happened after the Jews were murdered, exiled, imprisoned, enslaved, and so on? But Judea was totally desolated. The Jerusalem, as we did know it 2,000 years ago, was razed to the ground. And Hadrian, it was a kind of tyrant that he did everything he could to remove and exterminate even the footprint, the DNA of the Jew anywhere in Judea. And something's known today as Hadrian's curse, and he renamed Judea after the arch enemy of the Jews, Syria of Philistia. Now, quite some time, the Philistinians, in time it typified, they were around and existed in the time of Abraham. The stories about King David interacting with them. They actually became extinct, per se, or non-people, but they really existed in the Gaza Strip. That strip of land used to be called Philistia by the Romans. Well, there were no Philistines there anymore, and by the way, they came from Greece. Mahudabas claims that he is part Palestinian, but I mean, he would have to come from Greece. Greek ancestry, not Arabic. Anyway, not going there yet. But Bar Kokhba was renamed as Bar Kokhba, which is a pun for the Hebrew word of a liar. So you have all these events here that led to other events against the Jewish people. In fact, Emperor Hadrian is known as the curse upon Judea, a curse upon Israel. So you roll the clock forward from 135 CE, hundreds and thousands of years, moving forward in the future to where we're at now, where the whole area was considered a Roman-occupied Hellenist province of land. And it was renamed Syria Philistia. It was nothing Jewish about it. There were no Jews living in the land at that time. If they were living in an incognito and hiding, or interfaith marriage, or not being Jewish at all. Okay? That's typical of Jews living in Samaria. I'm sorry. In fact, in 1952 and 1960 to 61, there were a number of letters from Bar Kokhba where there were various messages to his lieutenants about war in the Judean desert. So I've just described to you an event in history, which we have a lot of information about. We have a lot of information about Emperor Hadrian and the General Severus, I believe, from England. We have a lot of history about this, okay? Some people still look up to this false Messiah as a great martyr, but I look at him as someone who is a liar, a cheat, and was directly responsible for the deaths of 550,000, more than 500,000 people. Can you imagine that? So moving the clock upward, I'm going to take you back to 1917, and a little bit before that, in the middle 1800 to very, very early 1900, was Theodor Herzl. He was a journalist, he was a poet, he was a scholar of Jewish history. He was not religious, but he was a proud Zionist. In fact, I believe he was responsible for the first Jewish World Congress, per se. And he was responsible for a lot of the Jews that are now in Uganda and parts of Uganda, because that used to be a British protectorate. And during that time, during Lenin and the pogroms and throughout Russia that were against the Jews and all the anti-Semitism, he actually tried to get the Jews to move there to have some shalom and free from violence and anti-Semitism. But unfortunately, many Jews refused to go, even though a few of them did. In fact, that's where Bethesda Synagogue, the synagogue that have nominated me by their rabbinical council and their authority as their interim rabbi, community rabbi. So you see, one thing led to another. What I'm saying, Theodore Herzl, he had the idea that all of this land, and at that time it was named Palestine, so the Latinization of Syria of Philistia and the mistranslation, and a lot of times when you translate a language over and over again, and then you have multiple map makers that make mistakes in mapping, and it was easier for them to say just Palestine. So the word Palestine came from Philistia, and then it became Syria of Philistia, and then eventually it was called Palestine. And the province of Palestine extended all the way up to Lebanon, all the way down to the port of Aqaba in the southern Israel. And this whole area of land there was an idea, a visionary, that Theodore Herzl, that led up to 1917 announcement, November 2nd, called the Balfour Declaration. So this whole area of land here, and you can see a picture here of Theodore Herzl and the Balfour Declaration. Actually, I have a letter here. You can see this, and a map of Palestine during that time. And by the way, Palestine, all that time, even though it went through many, many other occupations and invasions since the Roman Empire subsided by the Persians, by the Ottomans, and so on. And many of those people remained in that land. The Jews stayed there. But in 1917, the only people that were called themselves Palestinians were the Jews. And I have proof of that. And I will show you here that actually a brief period of time there was coinage and money tendering. It said Jerusalem of Palestine there with a Zionist Maccon David there for the Star of David there, the currency. Absolutely nothing from the Arab world that was doing coinage and money tendering and so on. So even in the 1700s there were books written in newspapers. It was all Jewish. It was all Jewish, okay? It's very fascinating. Their history is documented there. And we can prove everything we're claiming, that we lived in the land of Eretz Israel from the very beginning when Moshe led the children of Israel to the land of Canaan, and then we took over that land, won that land, leading up to the golden age of King Solomon, and then the Babylonian exile broke apart northern and southern Israel into pieces, and already described to you what happened to Jewish diaspora and expulsion in exile from various lands over a period of time through the decades and hundreds of years, a millennia of time. But we were still there. We were always there. We came back there. We left. We were runaway, but we always were there. We had places of worship there. We had communities. We had eruv, chateaus, and other places where we lived and called home, synagogues. We had those places there, okay? Even though Temple Mount was a complete desolation, and even though you could not grow anything, and it was almost like a desert, the western coast of Israel was like a swamp, and you could get malaria very easily. It was horrible. But going back, though, to 1917, the Balfour Declaration, is that there was actually a legal document that said, and England was a much different place back then. Great Britain, or the British Empire, was much different than the anti-Semitic smucky country that England has become today. I mean, they are horrific against the Jewish people. They're pro Arab Palestinian terrorism, pro Hamas. It is horrific. It's horrific. But a wonderful person by the name Arthur James Balfour that came up with this declaration. These were not Jews. Who were actually British foreign secretaries, administrative officials, um, uh, also an individual by Lionel Walter Rothschild, second Baron Rothschild of Tring, a leader of the Anglo-Jewish community. Interesting enough, and they mapped out land in Palestine that extended past the River Jordan, where Jordan, the nation, exists today. All of that land, all the way from the outer boundaries to the eastern boundaries of Jordan, all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, all the way up to southern Lebanon, all the way down the Port of Aqaba, even the Sinai Peninsula, all of that land, and some of Egypt, was to be given to the Jewish people as a Jewish homeland. So back during that time, briefly, there were a lot of Bible thumpers, a lot of Protestant pastors and things like that. They were pro-Israel. They wanted Jews to go back to Israel. They believed that would bring their Messiah, and so on and so on. They were actually for giving that all land back to the Jewish people as their protectorate, controlled by the British Empire, as a British colony. The Great Britain owned a lot of colonies like Hong Kong, India, and other nations like that. So that area, after it was taken out of Ottoman Turkish rule, the British troops moved in and they quieted down the Arabs and tried to make people live peaceably, even though there was brief flare-ups of conflicts between Arabs and Jews, Jewish Zionists, and things of this nature. That whole area of Palestine was called Jewish Palestine. It was never Arab Palestine. Never, never, ever. If you don't believe me, look up the history. I'm going to have information here to prove what I'm saying is true from peer-reviewed sources, okay? So these agreements were very sincere, and this was leading up to World War I, okay? That's where we are now. So we're leaving 1917, and of course, we had World War I, and that broke up a lot of those agreements, unfortunately, because during World War I, the Arabs had wars, the Germans had wars and everything else, and the conflict and all that, and people forget what they promised. Of course, nations change their positions toward Israel, toward Jews, depending on who's the ruling power of that time. Now, I want to talk about an individual by the name of Yasser Arafat. Okay, Yasser Arafat. Everyone probably knows who the individual was. Okay. Briefly, there was a Palestinian declaration similar to the Balfour Agreement, and this was before 1948. No, I'm sorry, after 1948. The Palestinian Declaration had been formally established, the state of Palestine, and was written by the Palestinian poet Muhammad Darwish, proclaimed Yasser Arafat on 15th November 1988 in Algeria. It had previously been adopted by the Palestinian National Council, known as the PNC, the legislative body, the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, okay, by a vote of 253 in favor, 46 against, and 10 abstaining. It was read at the closing session of the 19th PNC. So we have Jewish World Conference, they have Palestinian conferences too, where they meet together. And a standing ovation, Yasser Arafat. So upon completing the reading of the declaration, Arafat, a chairman of the PLO, he was just filling in for a position. He was born in Egypt, by the way. He had an Egyptian mother. He assumed himself, he was not voted, he was assumed internationally as the Presidente of Palestine. Okay? So by April 1989, long after Israel was declared independent, from when the British expired their colony rule over there, and then they recommended that Israel have its own state after the Holocaust. I didn't cover that, So not the reason why the Jews at all returned to that small strip of land back in 1948, the so-called pre-1967 line, is because it's world sympathy for the Jewish people, Jewish war refugees, people survivors from the Holocaust. That's the whole reason. And then England was leading in that too during that time, but they wanted to appease the Arabs as well. Because in 1946, briefly, the Hashemite kingdom, the royals, Arab royals there that originated from Saudi Arabia, by the way, and across in the eastern part of, Dead Sea and the Jordan River, that whole area that was given to the Jewish people in the Balfour Agreement Declaration was given to the new Jordanian state, where they had King Hussein and others that had established that monarchy there. Well, what happened, there was a brief Arab Cold War between the so-called Fatah party, which eventually was the political establishment of the PLO, the same political party that Mahmoud Abbas, the self-proclaimed Presidente of the Palestinian people, West Bank Palestinians. You have West Bank Palestinians, you have Gaza Palestinians. But what I'm trying to say is that Yasser Arafat was actually kicked out of Jordan because he wanted to use his people, his followers, to establish a caliphate, essentially, a Palestinian state, and overthrow the monarchy there in Jordan. Well, Arafat was kicked out of there. The PLO was not allowed to legally operate there politically in elections or anything. And always people, we're talking about thousands and thousands of people, Palestinians, Arab Palestinians, left Jordan, went into Eretz Israel, and then started causing problems to the Jews there. And I don't want to have to get into all the terrorist activity. Let's see, the Olympic bombing, airplane hijacking, Islamic Jihad started because Yasser Arafat and his Palestinian followers there, because they wanted to nullify not only the Balfour Declaration, they wanted to nullify Israel's right to exist under nothing internationally recognized by the presidents of the United States and Russia and other countries as an independent state of Israel. So there was something quickly was known as the Black September that described the coup of Yasser Arafat against the kingly rule in Jordan. And many Palestinians died from that. So that whole thing is that Yasser Arafat literally took the flag of the Jordanian monarchy, which had a star on it. Well, he removed the star, took the same Jordanian flag in the color scheme, and made it his national flag in Israel. Now, what I wanted to point out, and the reason why I gave you all the diatribe about Native Americans, about how a country is a country by their history and their existence over a period of time, they're Native Americans, they're Cherokees and Sioux and Crow in the U.S. now in territories throughout the United States, okay? They are still there, and they were there before we came into this country. What I'm saying is, without getting into anything religious, I can tell you about the Torah. I can tell you about the promises given to Abraham and the Muslim Holy Bible, the Quran. The prophet Moshe was mentioned more and more predominantly, many times over than Muhammad was. And actually says in the original Quran, not the ones you can buy on Amazon today, that the land of Israel was given to the Jewish people. And Jerusalem is not even mentioned in the Quran. Neither is the word Palestine. What's really funny, I don't know what news outlet captured this, and I can't know if I can find a video, but when Yasser Arafat was talking about his new Palestinian independent state, he couldn't even say the word Palestine or Palestinian. You know why? There's no P in the language of Arabic. No P. Literally, if you transliterate the word Palestine into Arabic, the translated letter is a B, and the B has a sound of an F as in fox. So what I say is, I describe them as fake Balestinians. fake Palestinians. So I think I got that wrong. The P is an F, and it sounds like Palestine, a Palestinian. So he tried to say Palestine or Palestinian, and then someone corrected it and say Palestine. Well, Palestine is not a word in the Arab tongue. It never has been. It never has been. Actually, if you knew Latin, and you knew English, then you knew the word, and you see maps and things. You saw the word Palestine going across there. It's been renamed. The whole area of Eretz Israel has been renamed many, many times. Syria Philistia, and then it was known as Palestine, back and forth from the Latinization and mistranslation from the language of Roman Empire. And then it was actually called Jewish Palestine, but it was never called Arab Palestine. Now, the Arabs, powers that be during that time, 1800s, or early 1900s, even before, they wanted to establish a caliphate in that whole area, and they wanted to unite all the warring Arab parties there. Muslims don't get along very well at all. And in fact, they have killed more of each other over a period of time than any other threatening world power. They really have. They really have. You see what's happening in Hamas, the war and everything else. You heard about recently about a hospital, 500 children, women, injured people were brutally killed by a deliberate rocket attack by Hamas militant Palestinian commanders, and then they blame the Jews on this. Where I'm getting at in conclusion of all this, okay? Bring it home, okay? Hopefully I get a home run. The word Palestine is a historical word that was mistranslated from Syria Philistia, okay? It was never a word in the Arabic lexicon of their language. It was never mentioned by Muhammad, the great prophet of Islam. It was never mentioned in any of the commentaries from the Quran either. The word was popularized for the Arabs around 1964 by Yasser Arafat, because he hated the Jewish people. And at that time, I don't want to get into all the details behind this because it's confusing. It's confusing to me. And I've done a video on this recently. There were a group of Muslims that believed the Holy Land, Jerusalem, the so-called fake Al-Aqsa Mosque, was the real Al-Aqsa Mosque. At least they pretended it. And they were actually in conflict with the royal class in Saudi Arabia, and they were actually for a long time were prohibited to go to Mecca. Okay, that is a traditional Ramadan pilgrimage area. So you have a group of Muslims that have Ramadan on Jewish Temple Mount, and then you have a group of Muslims that go to Mecca. That's just how it's always been since that time. And that's why Temple Mount is so important to the so-called Palestinians today. And that's why Hamas said the entire Temple Mount is not a Jewish artifact. The Zionists are liars. It's a Palestinian artifact. It's built by the Palestinians, built by the Arabs, and everything else. Okay, no, the city was rebuilt by the Roman Empire. Okay, it was not built by Arabs. It's not built by anyone. Of course, 5 mosques there were built by Arabs. And Dome of the Rock was built, and the fake Al-Aqsa Mosque was built there 100 or more years after Muhammad had passed away. Okay, so when the Fox News talks about the Palestine crisis in Gaza, the humanitarian crisis of Palestinian civilians, okay, 2 million of these people voted for Hamas since 2007 twice to be their democratically elected government, to rule over them. And before the war, in fact, during the time of President Trump, things were fairly stable, and Palestinians were going back and forth for their work visas, back and forth to Israel, back and forth to Jewish-controlled areas in Israel, to work for legal tender and bring home money to their families. All nice, right? What I'm saying is none of these Palestinian civilians, per se, merchants and families and everything else, none of them were forced to stay in Gaza Strip. In other words, Hamas did not have guns like the Berlin Wall, the East Germany, and the Soviet Union would shoot you if you tried to leave across that barrier there. Well, as far as I know, Hamas did not do that because they wanted to encourage morale and welfare, supposed. At least they want to advertise that. So the reason why 2 million Palestinians are trapped in Gaza Strip now, in the middle between the warring IDF army and IF flights over, bombing, and Hamas militants, is because they've chosen to live there. They've chosen to give their boys and girls to the militants to be raised to be terrorists. So in conclusion, what is Palestine? What are the Palestinians? Well, we're talking about the Chronicles of Narnia. We're talking about The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. We're talking about Game of Thrones and fictitious kingdoms and city-states and countries and things of this nature. It doesn't exist. There was never an Arab founded, independent Arab Palestinian state in anywhere near Israel. It was not. They controlled areas of Jerusalem, don't get me wrong. Of course it did. In fact, 1967 war, that we took back huge amounts of real estate. We controlled the Sinai Peninsula. We controlled all the Gaza Strip. We controlled East and West Jerusalem. We controlled all of the West Bank. In fact, 100,000 so-called Arab Palestinians went to Jordan as refugees. In fact, Jordan today, 75% of the entire population is so-called Palestinian, and you have Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon too, and also in Syria. What these people actually are, folks, are Syrians. If you do a DNA test, they all speak Arabic. There's no such thing as a Palestinian language. The word Palestine is not in their Arabic language lexicon. They're simply majority of Syrian Arabs, generationally speaking. In the land of Israel, the Jews have always been there in some respect. Our populations have been very small and have grown over a period of time, and they're going about small depending on war and conflict. And there have always been Arabs there. There have been Druze there, and other nationalities as well too. Okay, like Africans as well. There have been people living there, and people buried there. And I respect any Arab Palestinian living in that land, because they have their loved ones there buried, and they have their worship places there, and they've grown up there all their life long. What I don't respect is that when they ignore their own Quran, they ignore the Jewish Bible, they ignore world history, and all the archaeological evidence that says very clearly that all of Eretz Israel was a Jewish nation going back 3,500 years, more or less, even though the Jews were exiled and expulsed from that land from various conflicts. The indigenous people of Eretz Israel were the Jewish people, because the Canaanites don't exist anymore. The Philistines don't exist anymore. None of those Pezerites and Hittites, Jebusites, none of these people exist anymore. None of the tribal people exist anymore. And there were certainly no Palestinians among the Canaanites. Mahmoud Abbas claims he's from the ancient Canaanites. He claims he's from the ancient Philistines. He claims, it makes all these claims that's not founded in science, archaeology, or anything else of any logical, rational world thinking. It's fantasy, and it's propaganda, and it's lies. The last thing I want to say here, and there's so much more to say about this. I mean, I could talk about 1948, we had indefensible borders because the mountains on the west side of the Jordan River were controlled by Jordanians, and they could shoot missiles and rocket fire and everything else toward the Jews. Same thing with the Golan Heights, indefensible. That's why in 1967 we won the victory, 100% victory against all the Arabs that invaded Israel, because they wanted not only to occupy the land and control it, they wanted to exterminate the Jewish people. In the Hamas charter today, it says, from the river to the sea, the Palestinians will be free of the Jew because they'll be wiped out. It's in their charter in Hamas. It always been in the charter since 2007, since they were elected. And shame on our prime ministers in the past, like Rabin and others, Benjamin Netanyahu, for not speaking what I'm saying. Only Golda Meir, our prime minister, said that I have no problem with the Palestinian people because they're not a people. And if you teach your children to love others and get along and live with them, then that's what you expect. If you teach them hate and violence and vile contempt for their fellow Jew and other races and creeds that's not like them, because they simply have a different religion or a different origins or whatever. If you raise them that way, you're going to raise monsters that you see ISIS-like behavior dominating the war between Hamas and Israel today. So shame on any news network out there that's talking about the Palestinian people like they originated from an ancient Palestinian state a long time ago, or a nation a long time ago, like the Philistines. The Philistines came from Greece. They were seafarers, shipbuilders, and they actually decided to settle in that area along the Mediterranean coast. That's where they came from, because we had DNA evidence, fossil remains of them. We know this, okay? Listen, can't we all get along, okay? Can't we all get along? There's no such thing as the word Palestine. There's no such thing as the Palestinian people. In the 1930s, there was a woman that I met several years ago, was born, and she, on a birth certificate, she was born in Jerusalem of Palestine. The only people that were called Palestinians from the late 1800s, 1700s, all the way up to the 1930s or so, were Jews. Were Jews. It would be a dirty word to call an Arab living in that land, a Palestinian, because the word doesn't exist in their lexicon. Yasser Arafat invented the Palestinian people in 1964. He did a coup against the Jordanian government, and he was so radical he got kicked out of that country along with all his followers. And he established the Palestinian Liberation Organization, means liberate Palestine of the Jewish occupiers. And if you like Weather Channel like I do, and AccuWeather, you won't find Jerusalem of Israel when you try to look up the temperature and weather over there. You'll find Jerusalem, Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, Jerusalem district. They are great anti-Semites out there that are nullifying the very existence of the Jewish people and thousands of years of Jewish history. I'm sorry, history is not behind you, Palestinian. You don't have a Palestinian language. You never have any Palestinian corn. You never have any Palestinian infrastructure or buildings or statues and things like that. We still have relics from the Roman Empire, from the Greek Empire. We still have Colosseums and things built by the Roman Empire. The roads built by the Roman Empire still dominate there. So we know that the Romans existed, even though they're not here to speak for themselves, unless you go to the Vatican and think that the Pope there is an evidence of the Holy Roman Empire. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a lot of information, I know, and there's a lot of information I have not disclosed, but I hope you get the gist. Okay, I did not mean to teach Jewish history 101 here, but I guess I have. I did not mean to teach the history of wars in Israel that are leading up to the point where we're at right now. But Benjamin Netanyahu, if you see this video or if someone shares it to someone in Israel and sees this, be like Golda Meir. Have a spine and stand up for the Jewish people and say, I respect the people that call themselves Palestinians in the land of Israel, but you will never have a Palestinian state within the land of Israel because it's not based on anything other than your irrational hatred against the Jewish people. You have to have a foundation to build a house. Benjamin Netanyahu needs to say this very clearly, and he needs to go to UN and say this. If he would have done this years ago, he's been a prime minister longer than anyone has in Jewish history. If he would have said it years ago and stopped sending millions of dollars to these Palestinian thugs in Gaza Strip and given money to water rights to Jordanians, and in 1994 was a horrendous, horrible mistake in which we gave away all of West Bank, all the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, and everything else by 2005. We gave away all that land to pacify the Arabs, the same Arabs that we whipped their pants off, the same Arabs that murdered Jews. What is in your mind to do such horrendous things? And those decisions leading up to 1994 and so on have led to the horrific terrorist attack, the greatest terrorist attack in Israel's history as a nation since the Holocaust. You know, the worst thing about people dying and being murdered is when it's totally preventable. And this war was totally preventable if people would just embrace the truth. Even if the Pentagon, our government, our president would just know the truth in history and stop and give the Jews the benefit of the doubt and stop believing every single propagandist lies from the fake Balestinians and Hamas and the monsters there and the monsters of Hezbollah and the mullahs in Iran that's funding all of these terrorist organizations, and you allow them to exist. Why is it Mahmoud Abbas under house arrest today? I already told you he got my friend Ari Full murdered. He also paid a slay. I'm sorry. I can go on and on, but I won't. I'm bringing to conclusion. I don't hate the Palestinian people, as they call themselves. I met a Palestinian, he's a very nice person. In fact, he begged me to forgive him for his some people, elements of his people that were committing these atrocities against the Jewish people. He actually said, I'm sorry, and that blessed me. That means there's hope in the world, right? There are two groups of Palestinians in the United States, by the way. Those that support Hamas and those, unfortunately, that do support Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. That's where Hamas came from. So if you ever if you're Christian or whoever out there, if you ever get in a discussion with a friend or if you have a young person in school and college, they talk about the Palestinian people, challenge them on history and science. And you'll win the argument of truth every single time. It's not hateful to be truthful. It really isn't. It's what God wants you to be. That's why He created you in His image, to be a witness of truth before a very lost world full of lies, half-truths, and murderous, hateful ideologies that are based on just pure ignorance. Take care. Rabbi Arab ben-Emmett signing out. Please mourn for Israel. I've been mourning all week. If you see a Jew, you see them, please be nice to them. We've had more of our share of pain and sorrow throughout the ages, but Am Yisrael Chai is still here.